This is Matches Below, and you're watching Citywide Blackout. Justice for all.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Max Bowen, and well, once again, I am flying solo. Co-host Curtis Hughes is on a much-needed vacation. We would certainly wish him a wonderful time away. But, I get to talk about two of my favorite things in the world. That is pro wrestling and comics. So you know what? Not too bad on my end. Specifically, I am talking about the recently launched series Hardstyle Juice. You can only get this through Comixology. And today, I am talking with series writer Clay McCormack and series artist Ricardo Lopez Ortiz. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. It is great to have you both here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
I do like that all these shows that we've been doing seem to have one thing in common, which is one of the co-hosts leaves, and then the other one takes the opportunity to talk about wrestling.
Weird. I'm sure it's totally a coincidence. Totally a coincidence. All right. So, Clay, why don't we start by just taking us on a quick walk through what this series is all about?
Sure. Well, this is the simplest way we've been describing it is as a pro wrestling murder mystery. It's about a pro wrestling family, the Castros, who are have their own pro wrestling promotion, independent pro wrestling promotion that they run with their father, King, is the person who runs everything. They have a superstar son named Rey, and they have there's a daughter who is part of the family business, but has aspirations to do other stuff outside of wrestling, and her name is Mona. And there is a tragedy that befalls the family, which causes Mona to have to kind of step into the shoes of her older brother and use wrestling to not only work through her own grief about what's happened, but also to possibly find out whether or not her brother had been murdered or if it was just an accident. So there's a bit of intrigue. There's a bit of pro wrestling insider slang. We're trying to build the world of an independent wrestling promotion as naturally and as honestly as we can, and some nice comic book action.
Very cool. And reading the story, it's pretty clear that you guys got a real love for the sport, because I'm seeing all these insider terms, all these background things. I'm curious as to just your own knowledge of it and kind of how you kind of built on that to write the series.
Sure. I was big into wrestling when I was a kid in the 90s. So I was my favorite wrestler still, I know he's not the best wrestler, but my favorite wrestler is still the Ultimate Warrior, because at the time he was basically the closest thing to a living comic book. And as a comic book nerd, WWF in the 90s was very much, a lateral move from comics. And so I was watching it up through the Attitude Era, and then I kind of fell off around the early 2000s, which in retrospect seems to be a good move. And I came back to it about 10 years ago, and coming back to it as an adult, and especially as someone who works in a gig economy, I was getting into the indie stuff a lot more than I had, because the indie scene was booming. They were doing really great stuff, and I started to see this sort of kinship between comic books and wrestling, not only in the stuff that they were doing inside the ring, but also the shows themselves. Because I remember going to one of my first indie shows and thinking, this is kind of like a mini comic book convention, where you've got this talent that is coming from all over the country, sometimes the world, to perform for people. And then in between and the intermission, it kind of turns into a little convention where everybody has their table, everybody has their merch and stuff. And it really got me interested in the lifestyle and environment that is this little niche bubble of independent pro wrestling. I mean, pro wrestling is a worldwide thing, but it's also very small. Everybody who does it knows everybody else.
Exactly.
It's very similar to comics. And and so I'd been wanting to do a wrestling comic for a long time, but I couldn't quite find the story. And Ricardo and I had been friends for a long time, and about 5 years ago, he had done this drawing for the cover of a sketchbook he put together of this beat up female deathmatch wrestler. And when it wasn't from anything, it was just a drawing he did. And when I saw that picture, the whole story just jumped into my head. And so I immediately texted him and I was like, what is this for? Is this from anything? Do you want to work on this? And so it came together very quickly. And the story has more or less remained the same since that first, burst of inspiration, not to sound too over dramatic, but yeah, I've been watching wrestling now consistently for about 10 years since coming back to it. And I really like digging into the subcultures inside it, because it's a really, it's each one of them is a little bit more niche than the other. And you can find all sorts of fans and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. It's a pretty wild industry and culture overall.
Oh yeah.
Hope that answers your question.
It does. Ricardo, man, same question to you. Your history in pro wrestling?
It's kind of like similar. I started like in like the 90s and stuff, like early 90s, I think, early to mid 90s. Was like a big WCW kid, so big into Sting and like all like the cruiserweights and stuff. And like I just like, so that's like kind of like where it all started. And I remember, because I think at the time, the Nitro used to run longer than Raw, right?
It did, yeah. I think one was 2 and one was 3.
Yeah, so I remember like I was only allowed to watch like the first 2 hours because I had to like go to bed to go to school the next day. And I remember that like so my grandfather would stay up to watch, and like the next day I would like call him and be like, what happened on the last hour of Nitro? You gotta tell me. And he'd be like, well, Sting showed up, he like beat up the NWO and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. But yeah, then like I kind of fell off of it in like the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of like when WCW went away. I kind of fell off of it, and I didn't start watching it until like much later on, when I started working for a t-shirt company, and we ended up getting the WWE license. And so I started like, I had to design all these shirts for WWE and stuff. And, I was kind of like, well, I don't know any of these guys now, so I better start like, I guess I'll watch some clips and stuff and see like what's going on. I was like, Undertaker's still around, and like, and I was like, oh, Shawn Michaels is back. That's crazy. So that's how it kind of like got back into it. I think that was around the time of the pipe bomb, I think. And so I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of crazy that this guy did this. That's kind of wild. And then like he got fired and stuff, or left, and the whole thing happened.
That seems to happen a bunch to him.
Yeah, it's kind of like his track record.
Really,
but it was really funny seeing like getting like that little behind the scenes stuff of it, because I remember like one time I wasn't like super back into it, but I knew that Clay was like super into it, and I was like, hey, watch this Dean Ambrose guy. I think something's big is gonna happen. And that was around the time that like he won the championship, because we got like this insane like asset dump of like Dean Ambrose stuff.
Oh yeah.
And like at that point in time, only John Cena and CM Punk had gotten like such a large asset of like graphics and stuff. Nobody else had gone anything like that. So I was like, this is weird. Something must be happening with this guy. But yeah, so then I slowly got into it, and got back into it, and kind of like got back into like super into New Japan and all that stuff. And
Rick, did you do the same thing I did when I got back into it, where when I started talking about it with other people or friends who like were kind of or used to be into it, I was like, well, I'm watching wrestling, but I'm not going to be like getting into like New Japan or anything like really deep down the hole. And then 6 months later, I'm like, have you seen this guy Okada? He's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, like, because at the time, like, I was like, I didn't know that like New Japan was still going on. I
Yeah.
think because I just assumed that like, because I remember New Japan from like, because they did like the crossovers with WCW and WWF in the '90s. I remember like they because they brought in some people and stuff, and I remember like they had like that's how like Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto showed up, and so I kind of like followed them a little bit, and then like I just kind of like forgot about that they existed, and then I think I saw something that was like on Twitter or something that was just like, oh, this match got like an insane amount of stars from Dave Meltzer, or like it wasn't even there. It was like, oh, it was like it's got like 5 stars on the Meltzer rating. I was like, what the hell is a Meltzer rating? So then it's like I started looking it up, and I just see like this Kenny Omega guy got like all these stars. I'm like, I gotta find out who this guy is. And I was like, oh my God. I thought I was watching good wrestling. I was not watching good wrestling.
Yeah, I realized I was back into it to an unhealthy amount when I was in Jamaica with my girlfriend at her friend's wedding, and we were from the hotel room watching a pirated stream of Okada and Omega.
Yeah, I think that may be the line in the sand,
Yeah. Hey, she was happy to. She loved it. So
then it works. It works. Yeah. Likewise, I got into this. I think in like the early '90s because it was right before the Stone Cold era. So that to me was like oh, who's this guy flipping off the boss and beating him up like every week, and he's drinking beer on TV. Holy shit, this is amazing. And then I think
one of the greatest moments of my life, young life, was when Lex Luger body slammed Yokozuna.
Oh my God, yeah,
on the aircraft carrier.
Oh my God, we could take that apart for days. I think because like he didn't really body slam him. He kind of like hip tossed him or something like that. It wasn't really like a total body slam. I bet Johnson body slammed him. Yeah, and then I think like you, Clay, I kind of fell off in the early 2000s, which hindsight was probably for the best. And I want to get back into it and I'm trying to actually. Like Instagram is very good for me to be like, oh, who's this person? Who's that person? I can sort of get like bits of it here and there. Ricardo, I want to know more about the drawing. The one that Clay saw that said, "This is our story. We're doing this thing."
Oh yeah, so like I had like been thinking about doing a sketchbook for a while, and like at the time I was like super into wrestling, and I was trying to figure out like something that like I needed something for the cover, and I was like, well, if I make more of these, I want them to like to have like a theme. So I was like, it was basically like, oh, I'm gonna make her my mascot for like my sketchbooks, essentially, and because then I called the sketchbook the Dirt Sheets, and so I was like, well, it's gonna be wrestling themed and stuff, and so that's kind of like how it went, and I just kind of like looked up a bunch of like the women's wrestlers that I really liked, and kind of like melded them all together, and just kind of like went with that. Because I remember like I think at the time like Asuka was really popular in NXT, I think. So I think like drawing, she kind of has like a similar kind of like like kind of like that robe that she kind of wears to the ring at the time. I don't know if she wears it still, but and then I think the mask that I did for that first drawing, I think it has a little bit of like Starlight Kid Desperado kind of mix stuff, and so and it's kind of like I just melded a bunch of stuff and went with that.
Oh, it's very cool.
Honestly, one of the things that stood out to me about it was she had a giant boxing glove covered in thumbtacks, and seeing the image, I was like, this is what I'm looking for. This is the mixing of professional wrestling and comic book sensibilities, like to a T.
Yeah.
And so it just really stood out as like this. I didn't know what I wanted, but this is it.
Yeah, that's props to Casanova Valentine, death match, New York legend. I gone to a no ring death match thing that he runs here in New York, and he had a boxing glove with like glued on thumbtacks, and I was like, that's cool as hell.
Yeah.
I want to use that.
Awesome. I actually got the chance to live out my nerd dream by working for a wrestling promotion. as a photographer. This is
Oh,
Northeast
no
Championship
kidding.
Wrestling. Yeah, Northeast Championship Wrestling, which is based out of like Dedham and Bristol, around that, and they're still around. Yeah, I got to like photograph some of the shows, and it was so cool just kind of seeing like all like the behind the scenes stuff. You know, the guys getting ready for the matches
Yeah.
and just seeing everything progress. Is like, this is the highlight of my life, and I can die now.
Hell yeah.
It doesn't get any
See-
better than this. It's all downhill from here.
You're another person we've talked to who is proving the thesis of our book, I think,
Yeah.
because as we were talking about doing this, like, we could see the wave coming. Like, wrestling was on its way back up, and
Mhm.
I'm like, there's not a lot of wrestling comics out there, other than it's mostly like comics about real wrestlers.
Yeah.
And there's a few that are original things. Like, there's Daniel Warren Johnson's book, Do a Powerbomb, which is great.
Which is
there's
awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And the
There's a book
ending is
called,
heartbreaking. Like, that's a
Yes.
beautiful story. And the end is like, I'm not crying.
Yeah. So good.
There's The Crimson Cage was a really cool
Yes.
one, which was like Macbeth
Yes.
done through like 70s pro wrestling.
Yes. Oh my God.
And there was a book called Ringside that came out maybe like 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay.
That I was the first one I had seen, and it just wasn't I liked all three of these books, but the thing that was missing for me was that it wasn't scratching the itch of kind of what wrestling is really like.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they have to, because they're obviously telling the stories they want to tell. Like, Daniel's thing is way over the top space opera stuff, which is fantastic. But there was I wanted to try and tell a story that felt like it was actually taking place inside a relatively realistic, obviously not exactly realistic, but relatively realistic modern independent wrestling company. I wanted it to be about the wrestling as much as it was about anything else.
Yeah. And have you heard back from like any wrestlers? Did they offer any kind of feedback as to the story or about like what happens?
No, I don't know if any wrestlers have actually read it. And
Oh.
if they have, I hope we don't get cease and desist letters from anyone.
I know, right?
Yeah.
This lawyer dropped this thing off. Oh no. Because I definitely get the vibe that if a wrestler were to read it, they'd be like, well, okay, yeah, these guys know their shit.
I hope so.
Yeah.
The one thing that I was worried about was, for whatever reason, and I think this is another thing that makes it so attractive, wrestling has its own culture and it has its own language sometimes, and for whatever reason, people who get into wrestling like to pretend that they are part of the show.
Mm.
It's they want to know everything. They need to know how all the magic tricks are done. They use all the language that the wrestlers use, and I didn't want it to come off as though we were just tourists, and so in using that sort of specific language, I wanted to try and make it feel as natural as possible. I didn't want to call it out. I didn't want to be explaining terms. I just wanted it to be kind of immersive, and hopefully it feels natural. It doesn't feel like a couple of marks just making comic books.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter how much research we could have done, like reading books and whatever, or like autobiographies and behind the scenes stuff. It's never gonna come close to like the actual firsthand experience of actually being backstage and dealing with all that stuff. So there is like, we just tried to make it like without it being sounding like corny or like too try hard, because that's the thing that I didn't want to come off as like try hard or anything like that. Like, it's like, yeah, there's terms and stuff, but it's like they're not being used in any way that's like, because we don't know like how things are backstage or anything like that, or like how things would be. So it's kind of like, it's just like an impression of things, like
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Like, there was in one of the scripts I wrote into the dialogue, someone uses the word kayfabe, and I immediately was like, I said to the editors, like, I think we need to take this out. This feels weird. Like, to actually say this word feels really, that feels like you're calling it out, because I don't know if anybody actually really uses that word anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I feel like it's kind of fallen. I think with just like the advent of the internet and everyone like learning all this background stuff, I feel like kayfabe's kind of fallen away.
Yeah, I didn't want it to sound like pro wrestling lingo Mad Libs, you know? 'Cause
Sure.
that's when it starts to come off as cheesy and
like kayfabe, mark,
disingenuous.
work, heat. Yeah. I get you. Well, from what I can see, though, from like what I'm reading, it definitely has a very natural feel. And I kind of thought, did these guys actually wrestle? Because they kind of sound like they actually wrestled.
Just watching a lot of it.
Right.
I did watch a lot of it. Yeah.
I actually did get to do a 1-day pro wrestling fantasy camp a handful of years ago.
Oh,
which
cool.
was very fun. Yeah.
Cool.
It would, that shit hurts, man.
I'll bet it does. I will bet it does.
Those ropes, I ran the ropes 10 times, I think, back and forth. And I had bruises on my arms and my hip for 2 weeks.
Oh, jeez. Okay. All right.
Enjoying the podcast? Get even more of the content you love from artists around the world on Citywide Bites. Experience the show live on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Instagram. With our interactive short-form interview series, you can ask your questions and be a part of the action. Hosted by Max Bowen.
Now, this question I'm sure you get a bunch, but where does the name come from? Hardstyle Juice? Because when I read this in the email from Comixology, I thought, okay, this is going to go a few different directions here.
We didn't have a good title. I was trying to think of something that worked for the story, and nothing was really standing out to me that didn't sound overly, dramatic or whatever. And I was reading an interview with a wrestler. I honestly can't even remember who it was, and he was talking about a match that he was having where he got cut open, and he used the phrase "hardstyle juice," and it just jumped out at me because it's another wrestling term for when you get cut open unintentionally. It's called getting busted open the hard way, and it comes out in various forms. And this form of it was hardstyle juice, and it jumped out at me as a title that it kind of sounds like nonsense, but it does actually have a meaning to it. It kind of reminded me of like Reservoir Dogs or something, where like it has a cool sound to it, but I'm not really totally sure what it means until you read the book, and hopefully you can figure out what it means. But
I think we were trying like that. The name I think was one of the hardest things to come up with. Actually, we were just trying to figure it out, and like I think like I remember like telling to Clay at the time, it's like I want something that's like, that like that movie was Edge of Tomorrow. That like that's not the like I wanted something like the manga name that's for that movie, which is like All You Need Is Kill, and I was like I want something like that where it's like it kind of like it's such a badass name for something like All You Need Is Kill, and they freaking name an Edge of Tomorrow. I was like, what the hell are you doing, guys? Like that other name is like so much better. The original name is so much. So I wanted something like that, like kind of it like weirdly doesn't make sense, but it also makes sense when you in the context of things. Like you just see it and you're like, what the hell is this? Yeah.
And I think the name mixed with the imagery and the energy of Ricardo's art, it just has like a really kind of, I don't know, exciting feel to it, I think anyway.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ricardo's art because it is so frigging good. I have been just blown away by the art. It's so visceral and intense and bloody. This is definitely not for the little kids.
Yeah.
But Ricardo, I want to ask about just how you developed your kind of art style, because like looking at your website and your past work, this is you. Like this is very much in line with some of the other things you've done.
Yeah, I mostly grew up watching anime when I was a kid because for some reason back in Puerto Rico there wasn't a lot of American comics at the time to go look at and stuff like that. And for some reason there was a lot of Spanish like anime, so that's kind of like where it all came from, because it was all like dubbed in Spanish. So and that's how like I mostly grew up drawing that style, and I just kept evolving through that, and like got into American comics when I was older, and then discovered even more manga. And that's kind of like trying to like meld those two things together is I guess like where it all came down from.
Excellent. What was your first anime that you watched?
Oh, it was Gatchaman, like Battle of the Planets.
Yes.
That was the first anime that I watched. It was freaking awesome.
Yeah. For me, it was Dragon Ball, which is on like Sunday mornings at 5 a.m. And you better believe I was up every Sunday morning at 5 a.m. to watch that.
Yeah, when that started, like, and it was really funny to see how it became super popular, because it was like at 5 a.m. on Saturday mornings, and then it slowly started getting bumped up, and then it was like, here's a 4-hour block of Dragon Ball now. It was crazy.
And then like a Cartoon Network comes on the scene. All of a sudden, it's like all these things you can see at once. It's amazing. Excellent.
But Toriyama is like one of my biggest influences. So
yeah. With this series, did you get the chance to try anything new?
Yeah, like there was something that like I was definitely trying a little bit. Because before this, I didn't use a lot of blacks for like framing things. So in this series, I've been doing that a lot more for like framing panels and stuff like that. And I definitely put more focus on like, I guess like the character acting and stuff like that. And trying to do things with like the panels to focus on like, for example, like sometimes like if a character is going through a specific emotion, I try to like either like do super tight on the eyes or something, or like maybe the mouth if they're saying something important, instead of just having like your traditional like here's a face talking, saying something, to try and like, vary like pull ins and pull outs, stuff like that to keep the angles varied.
We definitely gotta give a shout out to Heather Moore, because the colors, oh my God, the colors are brilliant. It's that wonderful combination of dark and light and intensity, and I really think it pairs so wonderful with your art, Ricardo. Just like the blending there, it's just very, very seamless to me.
Yeah, she's incredible. A lot of the stuff like she'll just do for the hell of it, and like I'm just like, damn, that's sick. I was like, she'll just do stuff like randomly, and like I know that like she added the flames to like Candy's jacket that wasn't there originally.
Yeah.
She was like, I'm just gonna add this, and I was like, hell yeah! And then like I remember like some of because she asked me like, is it cool if I change some of the colors on like costumes and stuff? And like I was like, yeah, go for it. And she definitely made it better. I think like the colors that she changed for the masks are better than what the originals were, for sure. And she always does something in every book that's like totally out of left field, that like none of us were expecting. Like she'll take a panel and like, I don't know, like overlay it over something else, and I'm just like, or take a piece of the panel and extend it out or something. I'm just like, whoa, that's cool.
At the end of the first issue, we have the way that the issue flows is it ends up kind of jumping around in the timeline a little bit, and then at the end, as the action really builds to a climax, we're jumping very quickly, panel to panel, through different points in time. And the way she handled it was just so amazing. And through the last 2 pages where everything goes down, the color choices was not something I in a million years would have picked. Mm-hmm. And it just worked so well to make sure everything remained clear, but also really impactful. And she's amazing.
Picture this. You finished your first book and nailed it. The plot, characters, all the twists and turns. This one's a winner, and all you need is the right cover. If you've got my art skills, this is the part where panic usually sets in. Enter the cover villain, hero to writers everywhere. Founded by noted author Remy Flagg, Cover Villain focuses on composite image covers for science fiction and fantasy writers. Give them the details, and they'll craft a cover using popular trends that everyone will want to see. But wait, you say, I've got ideas of my own. No problem, as Cover Villain loves a good collaboration. As they say, our goal is to put a little villain in every cover we make. Want to know more? Then head to covervillain.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram. One thing that I really liked too was the little details you had in there, like when we're in the Castro apartment, seeing like the title belts on the wall, the place looking a little bit like run down, like the boxes of T-shirts waiting to be sold, all these like little things that really kind of complete like the pictures. I definitely loved that kind of attention. Ricardo, what would you say was like the most fun kind of thing to draw for the series?
It's mostly been like kind of like getting to know the characters through the drawing and see like how kind of like they change a little bit from what the original designs were. Like they're still very like similar, but like as you get more familiar with like drawing things, like they'll change it a little bit. So like you can kind of see that like transition from like issue 1 till like the final issue where like I get a more comfortable drawing the characters, but also like you start to feel more in tune with them, and you can kind of be like, well, this is how, Chris would look if she did this, or like this is more like what she should be looking like at this point, and doing little things like making sure that like Chris, like when she's in her wrestling gear, she always looks bigger and stronger. Kind of going that like Clark Kent Superman kind of thing, So like that's always like fun to do, and and just like getting to draw like cool wrestling moves. At the end of the day, like that's just the best part about it. It's just like being like, all right, how can I draw this and it makes sense?
That was fun for me as well, because as I'm writing the script, as I get into some of these action scenes, some of them I just sort of wrote, Ricardo, I need 4 pages, 4 panels of people fighting. Do whatever you want. But other ones I would call out like, oh, let's do a Northern Lights suplex or a Tower of Doom spot or something. And so when the pages come back, it's like, of course, nailed it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Clay, I want to talk to you about the mystery genre, because of course this series is at its core, it's like a murder mystery. Mona is trying to solve the murder of her brother Rey right in the middle of the ring, because of course. But you've worked in this genre before. Your previous series, Redline, which is actually how the two of us met many, many years ago, is also like a murder mystery. So what about the genre kind of draws you in?
Well, I actually didn't write Redline.
Okay.
I just drew Redline, but
Gotcha.
I have always loved mysteries. Redline was written by Neil Holman, who's a great writer, put a really great story together. I think what draws me to mysteries is storytelling is all about information and when people get that information. And mysteries tend to be the most one of the more creative ways in how you can dole out that information to tell a story effectively. What drew me to it here was I was influenced quite a bit by Twin Peaks. And what I loved about Twin Peaks, or one of the things I love about Twin Peaks, is it uses this core of this murder mystery as a doorway into this culture full of characters, crazy characters, a whole a community full of eccentric people. And it uses the mystery as this sort of binding element to introduce you to all these other side stories and characters. And so that was, for this, what really drew me to the mystery angle, was using this as a doorway into this world of wrestling, these different characters that we can kind of go off and tell other stories with if we want to. I just thought it would be an interesting way to readers or viewers or audience, however you want to put it, always pay more attention when there's a mystery, for better or worse, because it naturally breeds theories and stuff like that. And so I think using a mystery to introduce a new kind of environment actually might allow the reader to pay a little bit more close attention to this new community in this new world. And I could be just talking out of my ass, but I don't know. That's how it always felt to me a little bit. Like you're focusing on like a lot smaller details. So if you're telling a story that has a lot of smaller details, specific details to the culture that you're presenting, then that stuff is hopefully going to come across and land a little bit stronger than if it was just, kind of background noise.
So we are now 3 issues into the series, and I won't say what's happened because, folks, you got to read it. But there has been a big reveal, and when I saw that, I thought, called it. I knew it. I just knew it.
You talking about the end of the 3rd issue?
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, I knew it. I knew something like this was going to happen.
Well, what I'll tell you is, you're not the first person who said that, and do you really think I'm going to tell you that information in issue 3?
Nope.
Have it be correct.
Nope. Absolutely not. Like, I definitely know.
Okay.
It's like, okay, this is a cool reveal. I know it's not the end, obviously, because we still have more to go. But I thought, I knew this particular twist because I've read like a lot of mysteries, watched a lot of like Law and Order. So the twist, the early twist, I saw that.
Yeah.
And brilliantly done too. Brilliantly done. The whole scene was just like so brutal.
Oh, thanks. Well, it's the thing about comics, right? Is it's kind of similar to television in that you really got to end your issues with something that's going to make people interested enough to come back. And I think a lot of modern comics kind of forget to do that. And so I have the stuff that I write, I always try to end my issues as strongly as possible. So that kind of stuff I do try to save for, moments in the story arc where they make the most sense, but also the points where they're going to hook you as strongly as possible to bring you back for the next one.
Hi, this is singer Kate Eppers, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
Did you have to do a lot of like careful planning when it came to the pacing of the story so that it goes in like the right way?
Yeah, it's funny. We did like 4 or 5 drafts of the outline, because there's a lot of stuff when you get into something like this that has a lot of moving parts and a lot of red herrings or whatever you want to call them. It's a lot to kind of have on the table at once, and make sure all the pieces are in the correct order. And it was the kind of thing. It was funny where we had done like 5 outlines. And then I sat down to write the first issue and I wrote page 1. And then I looked at my screen and I went, this isn't going to work. And I basically kind of had to push the outline away and move things around again, because once you start getting into the story and seeing how it's flowing, it's very different than what your outline, because you can put stuff, you can bullet point stuff all day, but you're not going to know until you actually have to play the music, so to speak, how it's going to sound together.
Yeah, exactly. And then you just don't know, because you can have the outline, right? And you're like, well, we know this is where we have to get to.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you're start writing or like throwing ideas, and you're just like, then you realize, well, this issue now is 70 pages.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're obviously not going to do that. So
Yeah. One of my, what's the word? Failing, however you want to put it, as a writer is I tend to overstuff issues on my first draft or my first outline. So my outlines, if you go through the outline, it's like there's no possible way all this stuff could happen in 22 pages. So you got to strip that stuff out and you have to kind of pare it down to what's most important. And this one was kind of tricky to structure because we do a bit of time jumping to kind of keep you on your toes a little bit. And so that was something we had to keep in mind when we were going to move from the past to the present, et cetera, et cetera. But there were big key points that I always wanted to make sure I hit at certain points. For instance, in issue 3, there is the big fight scene that opens the issue. And that was one of the first kind of images that I had when I came up with when we started generating the idea for the book, because I was really drawn to the idea that wrestling is a performance for the crowd, but there's a reality going on inside the ring of communication and trust and all that kind of stuff. And so I had this thought of, what if you had this really violent death match, which everybody loves to watch, but what the audience doesn't realize is what they're actually watching is an interrogation. So what's going on in the match is real. It is life or death. There is actual violence going on, but the audience is completely oblivious to it. And so that sort of mixing of the real and the unreal and was really what attracted me to doing it this way.
I did like the realism component to this. Like, you don't go into like any kind of magic or kind of sci-fi stuff, but was that ever kind of your thought, like, how can we kind of jazz this up a little bit?
Honestly, no, because, like I was saying before, I feel like there aren't a ton of wrestling comics that are just wrestling. It's usually like, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way, but it's like wrestling in space, or what if they were monsters? It's never just wrestling in its pure form. And also, I knew Ricardo was going to cover that, because we can have the story stay grounded, but his artwork is going to bring all the magic we need, And some of my favorite scenes in the book are the most down to earth stuff, like the scene in issue 2 where Chris and the other wrestler are backstage planning out the match. That page that Ricardo drew is fantastic. Like the way that he managed to work all that stuff together and have it flow so you can kind of visualize what they're talking about. It was great. Like I really enjoy getting into that stuff and seeing how he handles it. And when we need to go big, he absolutely can do that.
Also, I want to say that other wrestler, fuck that guy. What an asshole he is.
Good.
Fuck that guy.
I did my job then. If that's your
you did
response.
some very good villains. Yeah.
Thank you.
What a prick. What a prick. He definitely got what he had coming. But speaking of villains, now, as I mentioned before, we're now into issue 3. We get the reveal of Jack Renault. He's another promoter, sort of the competition for the Castro family. Can you tell us a little more about him as a character and kind of the role he's going to play in the story, without spoilers, of course?
Sure. Well, the Castro family is very isolated. They have their promotion, which is doing fairly well, or at least it was. But they don't really go anywhere. They just kind of perform in their singular building. And so the idea behind Jack was to present this antagonistic counterpoint who is a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing for Chris. I know we keep using different names, but Mona becomes Chris.
Yeah.
Read the book, you'll figure it out. So when she goes to talk to this guy who is this other promoter, it's her first introduction to this completely other approach to pro wrestling, which is not, 50 people in a VFW. This is, they're playing at the Madison Square Garden. The production is huge. It's very enticing. It's very alluring, and it's very overwhelming for her. So if we wanted to have another promoter in there who was very different from King. And Ricardo actually made a really great call, which was originally I had thought of Jack as sort of like a Vince McMahon type. He would be an older guy who's like, really set in his ways. And Ricardo was like, what if we made him a young guy, more like a Tony Khan? I was like, that's a fantastic idea, because King is an older guy, and to have his counterpoint be a younger guy who has a new way of doing things, I think was a really great idea to create a nice contrast.
With him was that, like, I also kind of like wanted it to be like that when you look at him, he doesn't come off as threatening, and like, in front of all the camera, like two of the fans, like I wanted him to be like, oh, he's the guy that's like, he's saving pro wrestling, but behind the scenes, he's actually as big of a piece of shit as every other, promoter that's ever been, So I wanted to have that vibe where he just seems like he's a smaller guy. He's, very casually dressed and stuff, but in reality, he's like super cutthroat, and, he'll destroy your promotion if he can.
And visually, he's a great foil to King too, because King dresses like he has a lot of money, but really doesn't. And Jack dresses like he doesn't have a lot of money, but has more money than God, basically. So,
did any other characters undergo any major changes in the writing process or in like the art process?
Yes, there's one character in particular who went through a big change, and then the original character we liked so much we want to use in the future, but we had to move her into a different story, basically. The Candy Rockets, who's the sort of second in command to King. We wanted to have a character who was a mentor to Chris. And originally we had come up with this character whose name was Akana Terror, who was a Japanese wrestler. And when we were kind of getting into it and kind of planning it out, that character had a different vibe than what I think we wanted to go for in this first story. And so we went with Candy, who's a little bit, as the story goes, you get a little bit more of her story. You'll kind of see where she comes from a little bit. She's actually my favorite character in the book. I hope we get to do more. I want to, put her front and center if we can. But this other character of Akana Terra, who is this kind of hard ass, really, you think you've trained as a wrestler. You have not trained as a wrestler until you've trained with Akana Terra. We thought she would be better as sort of like, if we get to do more, a volume 2 type character where Chris can go to learn all the things she thinks she knows, but honestly has no idea about. I think visually, that's pretty much it, right? I think Jack was the only one who really changed visually. Everybody else kind of stayed the same.
Yeah, and Ken, because we just completely create a new character basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody else is basically the same. Yeah.
You mentioned the possibility of a continuation of the story. I know we're still not done with like the first arc, but has there been talk about a volume 2?
Not yet. I'm trying to figure out when the best time to ask about that is. I'm thinking once we finish the book, when we finish issue 5, we pass it in, then we'll probably like, how are you guys feeling about this? Would you like to do some more? We've got more stories we want to tell if you do. So hopefully they like it. And, the more people that read it, obviously really goes a long way to helping us get to do more. Yeah. So.
Exactly. All right. Well, folks, we are coming down to the end of this conversation, but a couple more questions to go. So we're 3 issues in. The 4th one drops on July 16th. Where is the story going to go? What can we expect?
Space.
I didn't see it coming, and I love it. Magic powers, too?
Oh, yeah. Anything. Whatever you want. Whatever will get you back.
Chris is really a demon? I saw it coming. Yeah. Totally saw it coming.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Let's do
awesome.
it. I think we get time. We can put that in.
Fantastic. Just jump that shark.
Where is it going? Well, there is definitely a fallout from the end of issue 3 that is going to put Chris in a really tough position in terms of what she believes, who she can trust. But unfortunately for Chris, she is not really in the best headspace at this point. So she might do something that is a little bit, maybe a bad idea. And that sort of gets the ball rolling into the climax of this volume, which I don't know how much I want to say about what happens, but I would say, think about how wrestling stories tend to go, and how often does the babyface really win the championship on the first try? Be brace for impact in issue 5 is what I'm saying. I guess.
Okay, I look forward to that. All right, folks. Well, that brings this conversation to a close. Clay, Ricardo, thank you so much for joining me. I've been absolutely loving this series. And folks, if you want to check this out, and you want to, obviously, you go to Comixology.com. It's $6 a month. Access to thousands upon thousands of titles, including this great series. And before we go, guys, please throw out the websites, the socials. How can folks learn more about you and the works?
Sure. Well, if you want to go right to the book, if you go to hardstylejuice.com, that'll take you right to the Amazon page. And if you have Amazon Prime, you can read it for free. And that, even if you're not paying for it, it does help us. So, any way you can get your eyeballs on it, please do it.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter and Instagram at cmccormack414. I think that's it. I got a couple podcasts, but I won't bore you with those.
For me, it's everything is at R. Lopez Ortiz. So rlopezortiz.com, at R. Lopez Ortiz for Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. But yeah, go to heartstylejuice.com and check out the book. And, if you like it, leave reviews. That's also,
yes, please.
Also very helpful. So far, we've gotten pretty good reviews, so I'm really happy about that. So, yeah.
And if you're in the Boston area, Ricardo and I are both going to be at Wicked Comic-Con in August. So come on down and talk to us. We can talk about wrestling and spoil the book for you if you want.
I like that. Well, folks, that brings this episode to a close. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time. Bye! And with that, we bring this episode to a close. Thanks for listening, and if you haven't already, check us out on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. You can catch this and all your favorite episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and new episodes are added every week, as well as on Boston Free Radio every Saturday at 10 p.m. You get at me at citywidemax@yahoo.com if you want to suggest a guest, submit your music, or just drop us a line. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.